There are women the world reduces to a function, and there are women who learn to make the function a fortress. You will vacate these premises by end of the quarter, said Mr. Aldous, and he did not look at Lyra when he said it. He did not look at the ledger she had placed open on the desk before him, its columns exact and damning. He was examining his own thumbnail, pressing the cuticle back with a letter opener, as though the entire matter of her eviction was less interesting than the state of his own hands. Lyra did not move. She was standing in the narrow office above the Aldous & Sons wool warehouse in Whitmore Street, and the smell of lanolin and damp timber came up through the floorboards in slow waves. It was February. The grate had been unlit since October, because Mr. Aldous did not heat rooms he considered auxiliary. "The notice period stipulated in my father's agreement with your firm," she said, "is 90 days. Your father is dead, Miss Vane." He set the letter opener down. He had a soft face, the kind that looked as though it had never been required to carry an expression of genuine feeling. The agreement died with him. She had expected this. She had been expecting it, in fact, since the morning 3 months ago when her father's solicitor had arrived at the Vane house in Harrow with his hat in both hands and his eyes on the ceiling. She had known then that the house would go. She had known the carriage would go, and the 2 remaining staff, and the quarterly income from the Aldous trade arrangement, which had paid a not inconsiderable £240 per annum and represented the last formal remnant of what the Vane name had once meant. She had allowed herself exactly 4 hours to grieve. Then she had come to Whitmore Street and asked for work. Mr. Aldous had found this amusing. She had watched him find it amusing. He had offered her the position of accounts clerk, she suspected because he thought she would refuse, or because he thought she would be poor at it, or because he had understood that giving a gentleman's daughter a counting-house stool was a particular kind of insult that also happened to be useful. She had accepted before the offer was fully finished. That had been 11 months ago. In those 11 months, she had reordered the entire accounts archive, discovered a systematic discrepancy in the supplier's ledger that had been bleeding the firm of roughly £30 a month for 5 years, written a corrective memorandum, which Mr. Aldous had ignored, corrected the discrepancy unilaterally without informing him, and increased the firm's net quarterly margin by £62. She had also developed a reliable system for predicting which carriers would be late, which had saved the warehouse 4 penalty forfeitures in 7 months. She had done all of this for 14 shillings a week, seated at a desk near a window that did not close fully, in a coat she had not replaced since the autumn her father took ill. Mr. Aldous knew none of this in detail. He did not read his own accounts with any precision. That was what she was for, and that was also, she now understood, precisely the problem. "The room above the sorting floor," she said. "I rent it from you directly, not from the firm. That arrangement is separate. Both arrangements end." He picked up a folded letter from his desk and held it out toward her without standing. "This formalizes it." She took the letter. She read it where she stood. 14 lines. Effective immediately, which was itself a violation of the Landlord and Tenant Act of 1730, though she doubted Mr. Aldous had been advised of this, or would care if he were. Signed with his full name in the florid script he used for documents he considered final. She folded it back along its crease. "You should know," she said, "that I intend to contest this." Mr. Aldous smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who had already consulted someone with more resources than she possessed. "Miss Vane, you are a clerk on a clerk's wages. Contesting requires a solicitor. A solicitor requires a retainer. I have made inquiries." He paused, clearly enjoying the pause. "You have 11 shillings and 4pence in the savings account at Barclays. You cannot afford to contest anything." Lyra said nothing. There was nothing that needed saying in that moment. She put the letter in her coat pocket, turned, and walked to the door. She was halfway down the stairs when the street-level door at the bottom opened, and the entire world changed. She did not register it as the world changing at first. She registered it as an interruption of light. The door opened inward, and the man who came through it was tall enough and broad enough that he eclipsed the gray February daylight for a full second before stepping aside to let it return. He did not look at the stairs. He looked at the warehouse floor, where 3 workers had been stacking bales, and had stopped stacking bales without being asked. He wore a black wool coat, double-breasted, with the collar turned up against the cold. Fair-skinned, sharp-jawed, with the kind of pallor that comes not from weakness, but from a constitution that simply runs cold. His hair was dark brown, close cut at the sides, and he carried no hat in his hand, which meant he had left it with whoever had driven him here, which meant there was a carriage outside, which meant the man was not in the habit of making concessions to cold weather or social nicety. He was, she would learn in approximately 90 seconds, the Duke of Ashfern. She learned it because the warehouse foreman, a capable and phlegmatic man named Dowd, who had not visibly startled at anything in the 3 years she had known him, went white at the collar and said, "Your Grace," in the voice of a man who has unexpectedly found a large animal in a room he believed was empty. The Duke did not acknowledge Dowd. He looked up at the stairs. He looked at Lyra. His eyes were gray, the particular gray of water in winter, and they assessed her without apology. "The accounts clerk," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "Vain?" "Yes." He looked away. He looked around the warehouse with the same flat, measuring regard he had given her, and then he moved toward the stairs. She had to step back up 2 steps to let him pass. He passed without speaking, and she turned and watched him go up, and heard the door of Mr. Aldis's office open without a knock. She stood on the stair for a moment. Then she went down to her own desk. She was there for 12 minutes before Dowd came to find her. "Miss Vane," he was holding his cap in both hands. "His Grace would like to see you." The office had changed. This was the only way to describe it. Mr. Aldis was still sitting behind his desk, but he was sitting differently. Smaller, somehow, as though the coat had too much room in it now. The Duke was standing at the window with his hands clasped behind his back, looking down at the street, and the room seemed to have arranged itself around him without his having done anything to arrange it. She came in and stood near the door. "Shut it," the Duke said. He did not turn. She shut the door. "Your name is on this ledger." He had the accounts book open on the windowsill. She recognized it. The main supplier's record, not the corrected version. The original. He was looking at it the way she had looked at it 11 months ago, with the particular focused stillness of someone who is very good at seeing what is wrong with numbers. "I am the accounts clerk," she said. "You corrected this." He turned a page. "Without authorization. The discrepancy was costing the firm £30 a month. I documented the correction. Mr. Aldis chose not to review it. £30 a month for how long? Based on the pattern, approximately 5 years. Something shifted in his expression. Very slight. She would not have caught it if she had not been watching carefully. £1,800, he said. Approximately. He closed the book. He turned, then, finally, and looked at her directly, and she felt the full weight of that winter-gray regard. "The discrepancy was deliberate," he said. "The supplier's representative is my cousin's former steward. The supplier is my cousin's brother-in-law." He paused. "My cousin owes me a significant sum. He has been routing it through this firm's accounts to reduce what I am owed. Mr. Aldis has been participating." Lyra did not move. She looked at Mr. Aldis, who was examining his thumbnail again. There was no letter opener in his hand this time. His hands were empty, and still in that particular way of hands that know better than to fidget. "How did you find the discrepancy?" the Duke said. It was still not quite a question. The pattern repeated on a 6-week cycle. Carrier invoices that ought to have been sequential were non-sequential, in a way that suggested a consistent substitution. I traced it to 3 supplier accounts, all with the same registration address in Clerkenwell. Silence. "You reported it." "I wrote a memorandum. It was not read." "No," he said. He was watching her. "I imagine it was not." Mr. Aldis said, in a careful, oiled voice, "Your Grace, the girl is a clerk. She doesn't fully understand the complexity of commercial—" "Aldis." The Duke did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The name alone, said in that particular register, was a door shutting. Mr. Aldis stopped. The Duke picked up his gloves from the windowsill. He had set them there at some point, and she had not noticed. He put one on, slowly, smoothing the leather over each finger. "I will be sending my solicitor," he said to the room generally. "This office is to be sealed pending audit. Mr. Aldis, you will present yourself at Thurston's chambers in Gray's Inn at 9 o'clock Thursday morning. If you do not present yourself, a warrant will be issued." He put on the second glove. "Miss Vane." "Yes." "Walk out with me." She walked out with him. Dowd was at the bottom of the stairs with his cap still in his hands and the look of a man who has been holding his breath. The three bail stackers had resumed their work with suspicious precision, the universal performance of people who have been listening to something they will discuss at length this evening. On the street, the cold was immediate and flat. There was a carriage, as she had guessed, glossy black with the Ashburn crest on the door, a pair of matched grays standing steady in the February light. The Duke stopped outside the door and turned to her. He said, "You have somewhere to go." It was so close to a question that she almost answered it as one. Then she understood it was not. He had already had the answer before he said it. He knew about the eviction notice. He knew about the 11 shillings at Barclay's. "I will find somewhere," she said. He looked at her for a moment. His jaw was set in the way of a man who is deciding whether to say a thing or simply do it. He reached inside his coat and produced a card, plain white, and held it out. She took it. It had an address on it, not his London house, which she knew was in Grosvenor Square from the way Dowd sometimes spoke of tradesmen's deliveries. It was a street in Bloomsbury, a number and a name, Mrs. Hartwell. "My late mother's house," he said. "It is maintained. The housekeeper is capable. You will stay there while the audit proceeds. You are a material witness." Lyra looked at the card. She looked at him. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "I am not sure what precisely you imagine my—" "You are a material witness," he said again, and that was the end of the conversation, and he got in the carriage. She stood on Whitmore Street with the card in one hand and the eviction letter in the other, and the cold off the February pavement coming up through her boot soles, and she thought about the 90 days she had lost, and the 11 shillings she had left, and the desk upstairs with 7 years of her father's correspondence, still filed in the bottom drawer, because she had nowhere else to put it, and she put both pieces of paper in her pocket and went back inside to pack. She had been at the Bloomsbury house for 3 days before he came himself. The house was quiet in the way of houses that are well maintained but rarely occupied. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hartwell, was a small, brisk woman of 60 who had taken one look at Lyra's coat and her single traveling case and arranged things with a tact that stopped just short of pity. There was a room on the second floor with yellow curtains and a working grate. There was good tea. There was a writing desk with paper and ink already laid out. Lyra had spent the first day in something very close to stillness, which was not the same as rest. It was the stillness of a spring that has been under tension for long enough that it no longer knows how to release slowly. She sat at the writing desk and catalogued, from memory, every entry she had flagged in the Aldous accounts over the past 11 months. She wrote 12 pages in 2 sessions and ate the supper Mrs. Hartwell sent up without tasting it. On the third morning, the Duke arrived without announcement. She heard his voice downstairs, one sentence, and Mrs. Hartwell's one sentence in reply, and then steps on the stairs that were not Mrs. Hartwell's steps. He knocked. She opened the door and found him looking slightly damp from outdoor cold, his dark hair with a trace of February fog in it, and she noticed, with the detached precision that had served her so well in counting houses, that he was not wearing a cravat. He had a coat and a plain shirt collar, open at the throat. It was the most informal she had imagined any man of his rank could look. He noticed her noticing. Nothing in his expression changed, but she had already learned that nothing in his expression changing was itself information. "The solicitor's office," he said. "Can you be ready in 20 minutes?" "I have been ready since Tuesday," she said, and went to get her coat. The audit took 11 days. Those 11 days were the most precisely documented period of Lyra's life. She sat across a long table from the Duke's solicitor, a meticulous man named Thurston who communicated almost entirely in the raising and lowering of one eyebrow, and she walked him through every irregularity, every non-sequential invoice, every Clerkenwell registration address, every 6-week cycle she had traced back through 5 years of entries. The Duke was present for 4 of the 11 days. On those days he said very little. He asked 2 questions, both of them exact and surgical, and each answer she gave him he received without reaction, and then turned to Thurston, and something passed between them that she could not name, but recognized as a transfer of certainty. On the 7th day, Lord Harwick, the Duke's cousin, arrived at Thurston's chambers in Gray's Inn, at a time he had not been invited, with a solicitor of his own, and a manner that was both aggrieved and slightly frightened, the combination characteristic of men who know they have been caught, but have not yet finished calculating whether there is a way to make someone else responsible for having caught them. Lord Harwick was a well-dressed man of 40, fair-haired and slightly florid, with the kind of face that had probably been attractive at 20, and had been insisting on this ever since. He looked at Lyra across the table with a contempt so automatic it was almost impersonal. "This is the clerk," he said, to his solicitor, not to her. The one Aldous said was meddling in the books. Lyra said nothing. She had her 12 pages of notes in a folder in front of her. She had been in this chair for 7 days, and she had not cried once, not in rage and not in exhaustion, not even on the 3rd day when Thurston told her that 2 of the irregularities she had flagged turned out to be connected to the suppression of her father's trade accounts, that some portion of what had been siphoned from the Aldous firm over 5 years had been deliberately rerouted to obscure a debt owed to the Vane estate, a debt of £410 which had never been paid because her father had not been given the relevant documents, which Aldous had been holding in a sealed drawer, on Lord Harwick's instruction. £410. Her father had died not knowing he was owed £410. He had died believing the last of the Vane money was gone. She had sat with that for a single minute. Then she had returned to the page. Lord Harwick's contempt lasted until his own solicitor opened the folder. Thurston slid across the table and went slightly pale above the collar. It lasted, precisely, 4 minutes and 11 seconds. She timed it against the clock on the wall, because it was the kind of number she would want to have later, the way she wanted all precise numbers, as anchors in the current that kept trying to sweep her into pure feeling. Then Lord Harwick looked up from the folder and across the table at the Duke, and the contempt was gone, and what replaced it was something uglier and smaller and more honest. "Soren," he said, using the given name, making it a plea disguised as familiarity. The Duke was looking at him with the gray winter gaze that Lyra had been cataloguing, without meaning to, since the first day on the warehouse stairs. He did not respond to the name. "The debt will be repaid in full," Thurston said. "With interest, as documented. The Vane estate supplement will be recalculated, and the outstanding £410, plus the 5-year interest, which amounts to £63, will be remitted to Miss Vane by Friday of next week. The Aldous firm will be placed in provisional management, pending the resolution of Mr. Aldis's own liability. These terms are not negotiable." He looked at Lord Harwick's solicitor. "You will have your client confirm his understanding in writing before you leave this room." The writing took another 30 minutes. Lyra sat through it with her hands flat on the folder and her eyes on the middle distance. When it was done and Lord Harwick had gone, she was alone in the room with the Duke and Thurston began gathering his papers with the quiet efficiency of a man whose work here was technically complete. The Duke had not moved. He was still looking at the door through which Lord Harwick had left, and in the particular quality of that stillness, she recognized something she had not expected to recognize. He was angry, not the loud kind. The kind that sits very still and breathes evenly, and would take a long time to pass. "He was also your cousin," she said. She had not planned to say it. "Yes. That is its own loss." He looked at her. The anger was still there, further back. He seemed slightly surprised by her, which she found she did not dislike. "Yes," he said again, more quietly this time. "It is." She was still in the Bloomsbury house on the 32nd day. This had not been entirely planned. It had begun as a material witness situation and had extended because Thurston had 3 more items requiring her signature, and then because a supplementary audit had found 2 additional discrepancies requiring her to identify the pattern, and then, if she was being honest with herself, which she had been for 32 days, because there was nothing else to do in the evenings in a well-kept house in Bloomsbury except be honest with herself, because she had not been given a reason to leave, and had not asked for one. On the 32nd day she was in the study on the ground floor, working through a pile of correspondence Thurston had forwarded with a note, saying she might find items relevant to the Vane estate claims, and she found the coat. It was over the back of the chair beside the cold fireplace, a heavy charcoal gray wool coat she did not recognize. She would have assumed it belonged to Mrs. Hartwell's husband if Mrs. Hartwell had a husband, which she did not. She stood looking at it for a moment, And then she went back to the correspondence, and 20 minutes later the Duke walked in from the hallway, stopped when he saw her, and looked, for the first fraction of a second, as though he had been caught at something, though she could not have said what. "Thurston sent more documents," she said, holding up the folder. He came in and sat in the other chair, across from her. He had been coming to the Bloomsbury house 3 or 4 times a week for a month. She had catalogued this the same way she catalogued everything. She had not examined what the catalogue meant. He reached for the folder. Their hands were both on it for a moment, and the fire in the grate, Mrs. Hartwell had lit this one without being asked for the first time last week, made the moment sharp and warm in equal parts. "There is a letter here," he said, reading, "from your father's solicitor, the original of the trade arrangement letter. Yes, it establishes the 90-day notice provision Aldous violated. Thurston believes it may add a separate claim." He set the folder down. He looked at her. He reached into the breast pocket of his coat. The coat over the chair, she realized now, was not his. This one, on his person, was the black wool double-breasted, and produced something small. He held it out. It was a piece of paper, folded small and softened at the creases from repeated handling. She recognized it after a moment. It was the memorandum. The one she had written 11 months ago and placed on Mr. Aldis's desk, the corrective memo about the supplier's accounts, the one that had not been read. She had assumed it was gone, discarded or filed into the pile of things Aldis considered irrelevant. "How do you have this?" she said. Aldis's desk was sealed as part of the audit. It was in the papers. He paused. "Thurston flagged it as a dated document establishing your knowledge of the discrepancy prior to my involvement." Another pause. Longer. "I kept it." She looked at the memorandum in her hand. The date in the upper right corner was 3 months after she had started at the warehouse. The handwriting was her own, precise and small, the kind developed in rooms with limited ink. "You kept it," she said. "It is material to the case. The case has been materially resolved for 3 weeks." He said nothing. She looked up at him. He was not looking away. He was doing the thing she had watched him do in moments of decision, the very slight stillness of a man who has already chosen and is simply deciding whether to speak it. "Why?" she said. He stood. He moved to the window and stood with his back to her for a moment, looking at the Bloomsbury Street in the pale late winter light, the plane trees without their leaves yet, the pavement gray-wet with old rain. His hands were clasped behind his back, the way they had been on that first morning at the warehouse window, looking down at Whitmore Street. She wondered, briefly, whether he always stood at windows the same way. He turned. "You wrote 12 words in that memorandum about the pattern of substitution," he said, "that I have not stopped thinking about since the day I read it. They were the most precise 12 words I had encountered in any commercial document in 2 years of dealing with the Aldis accounts." He stopped. He was not a man, she had determined, who used volume to compensate for difficulty. He was very quiet. "I found them before I came to Whitmore Street. I went to Whitmore Street because of them." Lyra sat with that. She set the memorandum on the desk in front of her. "You came to the warehouse because of the memorandum," she said. "I came to the warehouse because I needed to know what kind of person had written it." He paused again. "And because Harwick's scheme was already collapsing, and I needed the documentation to hold. But first because of the memorandum." She looked at him for a long moment. The fire in the grate made a small sound. Outside, a carriage passed. "How long have you had it in your pocket?" she said. He looked at her. 38 days. She counted back. 38 days from today was the day the audit papers had been seized from the Aldis office. Not 3 weeks. Not even from the day Thurston had finished. From the very first day, when the papers had come from a sealed desk in a warehouse in Whitmore Street, and a Duke had gone through them himself before giving anything to his solicitor. She stood. She went and stood in front of him, and she had to look up slightly because he was taller than she was, and she was not a short woman. His expression had done the thing she had learned to watch for, the thing she had catalogued and then started watching for on purpose, which was the very slight opening that happened when he was not performing composure, and had not yet decided whether not performing composure was acceptable. She took the memorandum back from the desk and held it out to him. He looked at it. "Put it back," she said. "It's yours." He took it. He put it in his breast pocket. He looked at her with the gray winter eyes and the particular quality of stillness that she now understood was not coldness, had never been coldness, was in fact the opposite of coldness, in the way that a coal banked very deep looks cold from outside the grate. Lyra, he said. He did not use her name as a title or a form of address. He used it the way people use a name they have been not using for longer than was comfortable. Yes, she said. I have spent 11 months, he said, conducting business in a way that kept you at a 14-shilling-a-week desk in a coat that is too light for February. That was Aldis's doing, not yours. I own a percentage interest in Aldis & Sons. I should have audited that firm 18 months ago. He stopped. I did not, and I have been sitting with that. She looked at him. This was a different kind of honesty from the kind she practiced herself, which was the precision kind, the document everything kind. This was the kind that did not edit. You sat with it for 38 days, she said, and then you came to a warehouse in Whitmore Street. Yes. And now it has been 32 more days. 70 days, he said. In total. She thought about her father, sitting in an office, not knowing he was owed £410. She thought about 4 hours of grief on the morning the solicitor came, and 11 months of lanolin smell and unlit grates, and the precision that had served as her entire defense. She thought about 12 pages of notes and 14 shillings a week, and the memorandum that had been in a man's breast pocket for 38 days before she knew it, through an audit and a legal confrontation, and 3 weeks of Bloomsbury evenings that had felt, quietly, like something she was not yet allowed to name. She had not cried in front of Mr. Aldis. She had not cried in front of Lord Harwick. She had not cried in Gray's Inn across the table from a florid man who had called her a meddling clerk. She was not going to cry here either. But she felt, fully and without apology, that the spring that had been under tension since she had allowed herself exactly 4 hours to grieve was beginning, quietly, carefully, with precision, to release. I am not going to thank you, she said, as though you have done me a charity. He shook his head. I would not want you to. The £473 from the estate claim is mine by right. I worked for it before I knew it existed. Yes, you did. And if you want me to continue working with the accounts, your accounts, the Ashburn estate ledgers, because I have seen how Thurston handles them and I can do it better, that will be a professional arrangement, with terms I expect to negotiate. Something moved across his face. It was the closest to a smile she had yet seen, and it was not the indulgent kind, not the tolerant kind. It was the kind that recognizes an equal. I would expect nothing less, he said. She looked at him for another moment, at the fair-skinned jaw, and the winter-gray eyes, and the breast pocket where her memorandum was sitting for the 39th day. And the rest of it, she said, whatever this is. She gestured, slightly, at the space between them, the fire and the folder and the 70 days. That is also a negotiation. I am aware, he said. I am prepared to negotiate at length. The almost smile again. I have kept the document. I intend to keep arguing its relevance. She said, then you had better argue well. I have the original in my handwriting and I know exactly what it says. He reached out and, with a deliberateness that had nothing impulsive in it and everything considered, took her hand. Not by the wrist, not in the ceremonial way of men who are making a point about possession. By the hand, the way two people take each other's hands when they have each decided, separately and then together, that this is what they are doing. His hand was warm. She had not expected that. She had been so certain, from the coal-bank stillness and the gray gaze and the February entrance, that he would be cold to the touch. She was good with numbers. She had been wrong about this one. Outside, the plane trees on the Bloomsbury street were just beginning to show the first pale hints of March at their tips. Not yet green, not yet anything definitive, but the bare arithmetic of a season changing, a count beginning, a new entry on the first line of a page that has not yet been summed. You know what it is to reduce yourself to a function and tell yourself it is strength. You know what it costs. The 11 months of precision, the 4 hours of grief permitted, and the rest deferred, the coat that is too light, and the desk by the window that does not close fully. You know the moment when someone holds out a piece of paper, and you realize they have been carrying yours. Lyra had learned what so many women learn last and hardest, that accepting partnership from someone who sees the full account of you is not the same as accepting rescue. It is something rarer. It is being known at your exact worth, and meeting someone who can do the arithmetic, and deciding together that the sum is better than either column alone.